Isaiah 9, 2 through 7. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who lived in a land of deep darkness, on them light has shined. You have multiplied exultation. You have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as people exult when dividing plunder. For the yoke of their burden and the bar across their shoulders, the rod of their oppressor, you have broken, as on the day of Midian. For all the boots of the tramping warriors and all the garments rolled in blood shall be burned as fuel for the fire. For a child has been born for us, a son given to us. Authority rests upon his shoulders, and he is named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Great will be his authority, and there shall be endless peace for the throne of David and his kingdom. He will establish and uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time onward and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The end is near. What comes to your mind when you hear that phrase? My guess is it's an image of a scraggly bearded man holding a sign on a street corner. At least that is the trope that is found in comics. This last week I was looking for an image of someone holding a sign saying the end is near, and discovered dozens of comics with that image with various punchlines. Here were a few of my favorites. The end is near. That's the Peanut Man with looks like a raccoon coming around the corner. You may not be able to see some of these. I'll read them aloud. The end is near. He says, can you be more specific? The end is near. Are we there yet? And the end is near, but it's not here yet, so maybe there's hope, especially if we each do our small part to make incremental improvements and avert disaster. I think the last comic here sums up well a common response to these apocalyptic warnings. In the face of the end, try harder, do whatever you can, however hard you can, to make sure you do your part to prevent the end of the world. The end is near, but if you work harder, maybe it won't be so near. Maybe if we can turn things around, if we only do a little more. This idea, the end is near, brings up images of the apocalypse, of something cataclysmic about to happen that will spell the end of humanity. It is the ultimate message for doomsdayers. The end is near, so stock up on canned goods, prepare your bunker, and do whatever you can to survive. And in the meantime, do your part to try to avert this upcoming and impending disaster. In many ways, the Hebrew prophets, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and others, were like these bearded men on street corners, warning Israel that the end was near. They saw how Israel had chased after other gods, how they had forsaken God's commandments, had failed to care for the poor in their midst, and warned them that if they continued on this path, Israel would be exiled. The end would be near. And the prophets, like that last cartoon, similarly emphasized the people's need to change their actions. They proclaimed that if the people changed their ways, that if they put their idolatry and oppression aside and turned back to God, they would find life. The prophets, many of them echoed in their words and teachings, they echoed back to Deuteronomy chapter 30, verses 15 through 17. As the people of Israel stood on the cusp of entering the promised land, Moses gave them one final teaching. Moses said this, "See, I have set before you today life and prosperity, death and adversity. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I am commanding you today by loving the Lord your God, walking in his ways, and observing his commandments, decrees, and ordinances, then you shall live and become numerous. And the Lord your God will bless you in the land that you are entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you do not hear, but are led astray to bow down to other gods and serve them, I declare to you today that you shall certainly perish. You shall not live long in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to enter and possess." God's message in Deuteronomy to the people was clear. Choose life or death. And God says when you forsake God's ways, you choose death and all that comes with it. Destruction, disconnection, exile. If you choose death, the prophet said, the end is near. The prophets, though, actually spoke about two different ends, if you go and read through them. The first end is that what we've been talking about, the end of exile, of Israel losing the land that was promised to them. Much of the warnings from the prophets that the end was near refer to this. But there were moments when the prophets lifted up their heads and looked forward in history to the end of all things, when God would renew Israel and reign over all the earth. Isaiah 9, verses 2 through 7, is one of these such passages. It is beautifully poetic, striking in its imagery, and paints a picture of an end that is not marked by doom and gloom, but by life and light. This word of hope, Isaiah speaks, comes to those people who are dwelling in darkness, those who have suffered under the burden of oppression. In the midst of this darkness, Isaiah declares that light will shine. They will rejoice as on a day of bounteous harvest. The clothing and weaponry used for war will be burned. A child will be born, and he will be the ideal king. He will establish peace and justice and righteousness, and his kingdom will be forever. This is a vision of the end of times, when God will reign and rule and establish peace on earth. Notice in this passage how very little relies on the people for this to happen, and how much rests on God's shoulders. The people who walked in darkness, on them light has shined. It's not something they did to make happen. They didn't turn the light on. It is something that happens to them. It is a moment of revelation, of divine intervention. The people rejoice, but it is not a rejoicing that they muster up on their own strength. It is a rejoicing in response to this light, this breaking of the rod of oppression. Again, a rod that they did not break. A child will be given to them. On his shoulders shall rest authority. He will establish peace and justice and righteousness. And then the passage ends with these words: the zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. God will make this happen. It is not dependent on the people and their actions. This is God's work. God will do this. I was talking with a local pastor this last week, and he was saying to me, it is so easy for things to slide into works righteousness. Bay Area people work hard. They are achievers and dreamers and don't sit idly by, but work towards the future they hope to see. Bay Area people work for justice and righteousness. But he also said that if Christ is not at the center of this work, it will slide into works righteousness. No matter how good one's intentions or desires or commitment to self-centeredness may be, without Christ at the center, all of it becomes a try harder, do more, be better theology. Isaiah's prophecy breaks us of that notion. The people do not elect the king. They do not give him authority. They don't make the light shine. They don't break the rod of the oppressor. God does it all. This is God's work and God's promise. The Lord of hosts will do this. For the people who heard Isaiah's prophetic word, this was for them a message of the end of time. It was a word of promise that one day, at the end of all things, God would set everything right. It was a promise that the end, though not near, the end was actually something good. The end meant that God would set things right. And then about 500 years later from Isaiah's prophecy here, a child was born to a teenage mother and her soon-to-be husband in a stable with donkeys and sheep. Upon his birth, shepherds stumbled into the room and shouted for joy. A few years later, wise men from the east showed up with gifts fit for a king. This child grew in wisdom and stature. He was baptized in the river Jordan by his cousin John. He traveled from town to town proclaiming that the kingdom of God was near. The religious authorities conspired against this man, and they colluded with Rome to have him killed. He was crucified on a hill between two thieves. And 3 days later, many of his disciples and hundreds of others saw him alive and well. They saw the wounds in his side. They saw him ascend to the heavens and sit at the right hand of the Father Almighty. And those first Christians discovered that what they thought was going to happen at the end of time, that when God would reign, was now happening now, was happening in the middle of the story. The radical, earth-shattering claim of those first Christians was that the end is here, now, in the person of Jesus. What God had said would happen at the end of time was now breaking into time and happening in our midst. Those first Christians went back into their scriptures and discovered that Christ was hidden on every page, shining through every word, paragraph, and story. When Isaiah here spoke of a child with authority resting on his shoulders, one named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace, they realized that he was speaking of Jesus Christ. The end of all things, when God would establish justice and peace and righteousness on earth, when God would reign, that end is now. The end is here. Christ is King. Christ currently reigns over all creation as King. There is nothing outside his scope, nothing outside his care, nothing beyond his reach. The kings and rulers of our day who think they have the power to set the course of history, they have the power to influence the markets. Those who think they are the powerful ones in our day and age are really just playing pretend. Christ is King. Now, I recognize there is currently much fear about the state of our world. Last week, after our joint service, or when First Pres Berkeley was visiting us, a woman grabbed the bulletin and pointed at how it said the 32nd Sunday in Ordinary Time. She said, "This isn't ordinary time. These are extraordinarily unordinary times." I was like, no, this is a theological claim. These are ordinary times. No matter what happens, whatever happens on the news, the front page, the headlines, those do not set the course. We do not follow the headlines of our day and age. We follow Christ who reigns. And so as people of faith, though we see the tumult of the world and the chaos around us, we hold fast to a deeper truth that Christ reigns, is currently reigning. And though we cannot square the chaos of our world and Christ as King, we hold fast to the truth that the headline does not direct the course of Christ's work, but that he reigns. And the good news is that we do not have to try harder, to do more, or be better to make that happen. We need only receive Christ and recognize him as King. We are invited to submit to his good authority, to entrust him with our lives, to stop trying to be the master of our own fate, and instead to entrust ourselves wholly and completely to him. I think the church calendar does a good job of capturing the tension of Christ's kingship. Because today is Christ the King Sunday, we celebrate that Christ is King over all things. And next Sunday is Advent, a season of waiting, where we recognize that Christ still needs to come again to make all things right. And so the Christian life is that which is lived between Christ the King Sunday and the first Sunday of Advent. Christ is King, and we are waiting for him to come and to establish his reign. Christ rules and reigns, and we wait for that rule and reign to be fully and firmly established on this earth. There is nothing outside the care of Christ and his providential rule, and yet we wait for Christ to make all things right, even when it seems and it's hard to make sense of what Christ is doing in the world. We are a people who live between Christ the King Sunday and Advent, the season of waiting. I'll admit, as I was writing this sermon, I was thinking, how do we bring these beautiful theological truths to bear on our lives? And I think all we do is we wait, we hope, and we pray. The things Christians have been doing for 2,000 years, and we will continue to do. Christ is King. The end is here. And we wait in hope and faith for his ultimate return to make all things new. Let us pray.